Due to the following CBS School Break special, Magnum PI will not be seen today. It will be broadcast tomorrow in the regular time period.
Word Balloon is brought to you by the League of Word Balloon Listeners. This episode of Word Balloon is brought to you by AlexRossArt.com. Alex is a brand new graphic novel coming out from Marvel and Abrams Books. Fantastic Four, Full Circle. It comes out September 6th. It's a rainy night in Manhattan, and not a creature is stirring except for the Thing, Ben Grimm. When an intruder suddenly appears inside the Baxter Building, the Fantastic Four find themselves surrounded by a swarm of invading parasites. These carrion creatures, composed of negative energy, come to Earth using a human host as a delivery system. But for what purpose? And who is behind this untimely invasion? The Fantastic Four have no choice but to journey to the negative zone, an alien universe comprised entirely of antimatter, risking not just their own lives, but the fate of the cosmos. Fantastic Four, Full Circle is the first long-form work written and illustrated by acclaimed artist Alex Ross, who revisits a classic Lee Kirby story from the 60s and introduces the storyline for a new generation of readers. Bold, vivid colors, his trademark visual storytelling, Ross takes Marvel's first team of superheroes to places only he can illustrate. The book also features a special poster jacket with the front flap unfolding to reveal an all-new, fully painted origin story of the Fantastic Four. Again, Fantastic Four, Full Circle, out September 6th. For more details, go to AlexRossArt.com. Out now from DC Comics, it's Dead Man Tells the Spooky Tales. Franco of Superman Adventures, Aw Yeah Comics, and Tiny Titans fame presents 15 tales narrated by Dead Man himself, Boston Brand, that will shock and delight horror fans of all ages. 15 stories created by Franco and 15 amazing artists, presenting bold art and great storytelling. This is a great present for the fall and holiday seasons to young readers or to share with your children at nighttime story time. The book is out now from DC Comics. It's Dead Man Tells the Spooky Tales. Pick up your copy online or your favorite comic store today. Welcome back, everybody. Time again for Word Balloon, the comic book conversation show. John Suntress here. Always happy to welcome Bryan Hill back to Word Balloon. Great to see you, man.
How are you? It's good to see you.
I'm all right. Thank you, man. Likewise. And honestly, Bryan, really, I'll be honest. First season of Titans, I wasn't sure. I wasn't sure if I was going to like this or not. But my God, now we're into the fourth season, and just the characters you guys have introduced, the conversations that these characters have had have really elevated my appreciation for the show. And absolutely. Good evening, Dowd. Good to see you, man. But really, I am loving it. And I think season 4 has started with a bang. And I'm intrigued with the potential directions that you're going in with Titans right now.
Oh, well, thank you. I mean, look, most of the credit there goes to our showrunner, Greg Walker, who has become like a really good friend of mine over the course of this. Here's the funny thing about TV. TV, you're working 8 hours a day in a room with people. And, and sometimes writers, they go different ways and all that. I've been on the show since the beginning. So I've really grown through Titans, right? And
that's great.
So like when the show started, just not even just on the show itself, but just the other things I was doing, like what I was doing in comics and all the rest of it, like I grew up sort of through that. So it has a lot of special meaning for me. And one of the things I really like about Greg is he's very receptive as a showrunner to perspectives from people who like live and breathe comics for a long time and all that. And so it's intensely collaborative, but we have a really good group of people for season 4, and I'm not going to try to name everyone off the top of my head because I will invariably miss someone and offend. But it's been a wonderful experience, and I just have so much love for the people that watch the show and find me on social media, talk to me about it on social media. that's an amazing experience. Even when they're mad at me, it's still amazing.
No anger here, man. Honestly, what I love about the show is that, and this is what you need to do. It's familiar, but it goes in its own directions as well, and that's what makes it interesting. I'm not one of those fans that needs it to be, word for word of what we get on the in the comics, and
Right,
while the
right.
DNA is there, again, I think the conversations that we're getting with some of these characters are just amazing. So Noah, congrats to the entire writing staff for giving us, I think, a very nuanced show.
Well, that's always the balance, right? Is how much are you going to mirror, replicate an adaptation, and then how much are you going to interpret with a kind of unique artistic perspective, right? And so Titans is very unique in the sense that it's both dipped a little bit in Batman, but it's also got characters that just haven't seen a lot of screen time in live action, right?
Sure.
And we're always making sure that we're just trying to service that the best we can, and also credit goes to the actors as well.
Absolutely, man. We're gonna go through the characters, but
Yeah.
I want to point out a comic that Jeff makes, and he says a lot of Gen Xers grew up with the Wolfman Perez books, just like you're talking about in creating the TV show. And Jeff had asked me. Jeff's a friend. He had texted me earlier. I know that season 4 was likely in production, and there maybe wasn't an opportunity to pay tribute to George Perez, who we lost earlier
Right.
this year. I don't know. I mean, first of all, and I should ask because I'm sure people are wondering, has season 5 been greenlit yet, or is that still a discussion that's happening above you?
Oh, I think those are part of the documents that Trump took to Mar-a-Lago. So, I could talk about things, but
Yeah,
I
if it's
just
not
got
out
off
there,
the
it's
phone
cool.
with AG Garland, and it's a thing. It's a thing. So we're just gonna have to let's let that unfold.
I understand.
Yeah.
That's great, man. You're
Big
killing
fan
it.
of Titans, me. I'm a
That's
big
right.
fan
A lot
of
of
the
us.
show. Many people are saying it's one of the best shows that's out there.
Very good. Jesus. Dowd says, I'm loving the hell out of it. Quick question. Were there any Titans characters from the comics the writing team wanted to use, like, say, Kid Devil, Terra, and they wouldn't let you? Yeah, in general. And you don't have to, again, obviously, Brian, you know what you're doing. You can say as much as you can.
Sure.
But yeah, are there some characters where it's like, no, can't go there?
The DC side of it has been enormously generous to us, right? So now, when it comes to getting permission for using certain characters and not using certain characters, I'm not really part of that process, right? So that's all kind of happening sort of above me. I mean, I'm a supervising producer or something or other, but that's more of a Greg Walker thing.
I understand.
But I can tell you that in the writing room, we never feel like DC is anything but an ally to what we're doing.
That's great. And honestly, talking to showrunners like Pat Schumacher, that's basically what he's told me about Harley Quinn. And I mean, God, that show too is an R-rated show that can go anywhere that it wants to go. And I think that's amazing. Let's start talking about the characters.
Sure.
Here, let's see.
There's Brenton. There he is.
Yeah, Brenton's a great Dick Grayson. I do find it interesting, and I wonder too, because obviously the people at Star Lab, when he walks in, they all know who he is. Jinx knows, that Dick is Nightwing and everything. So yeah, and again, forgive me, I know it's kind of a nerdy question, but where are the secret identities as far as Titans goes?
I think the average citizen doesn't know whose identity is or what, right? But we're talking about something like Star Labs, because we live a little bit more in the realm of verisimilitude. You figure, well, you've got Justice League people walking in and out of the place, right? And if you're going to get an EKG in Star Labs, you're probably not going to wear your mask with no shirt on. It's like things like that, right? So I think there's sort of a understanding that what happens in Star Labs stays in Star Labs.
All right, fair
And
enough.
that's kind of how we work with it. But I think the actual person on the street certainly isn't aware of the secret identities of characters. And the Titans, it's an interesting group, right? Because so many of them, are just kind of out there in general. We're looking at Gar, you're looking at Corey,
Yeah,
you're looking at Rachel, right? So
absolutely.
it's a bit of a cornucopia of those things, but that's sort of how we treat it.
Okay, and Lex obviously, and again, I can see that because like Trump, he gets information, and
That's
so I'm
pretty
sure
good. That was
Okay.
good.
All right, well, yeah, we.
that was very good. That was
You know
very
what
good.
sucked, Brian? In 2015, I was working at a rock station, and I could imitate Trump. And the morning guy's like, "Will you do it on the show?" And I'm like, "I don't like." I mean, and I'm not saying I won't do it because occasionally I'll do it. Drop of the hat. But I'm like, I don't like this guy. I don't want to do it.
Well, it's just I met him. So
Really?
just quick aside. So I didn't meet him when he was
Please.
president. I've never met the president of the United States.
Yeah, but still.
But when I was in NYU last year of NYU, I did work at Playboy magazine in the marketing and public relations department. And
Cool.
so they would do all of these events. And when you work in marketing, you get to go to the events because PR and marketing is where the party stuff comes from. And I got to go to a Playmate of the Year party. This is in New York. I didn't work in the LA office. I worked at 57th and 5th. I'm not even sure they still have that office up there now. I mean, so much has changed in the world of magazines.
Sure. Yeah.
But
yeah.
I was able to go to the Playmate of the Year party. My boss, Allison Raleigh, I don't know if she's watching this, but if you're there, Allison, you were awesome. Thank you. She got me to go in, and he was there. A lot of people were there, and I had like a 5-minute conversation with the guy, and he was fine. When I talked to him. Yeah. What is it that you in marketing? Or marketing is very important. It's very important. It's very good. And so he was like everybody. He was just there, and he was partying. He wasn't drinking though.
Okay.
For what that's worth, everyone else had a cocktail in his hand, and Mr. Trump did not.
Understood. We'll get back to Titans in a second, but I am curious about Playboy because my God, Playboy was such a force for a long time. I've talked to others who have worked there as well, and was it? And again, with certainly now, unfortunately, I think. Well, maybe fortunately, a lot more of Hef's personal things have come out.
Oh, for sure.
But I mean, I've talked to people with different backgrounds, like Karina Becco, who was working at the mansion and was the zookeeper essentially for all the exotic animals that have been on premise, to Mark Bernardin, who was writing articles for Playboy and stuff.
So Mark got into the editorial side. I was just a pup when I was working there. I mean, it was a glorified internship, right? And so I was in the PR and marketing department, but I was basically just mailing magazines to different people, just doing the busy work that you do. But the office itself was about 70% women in that section. Unfortunately, editorial was like all dudes, but they were the first floor editorial, and then operations was the rest of the building, and so I made really good friends there. The design lead, a woman named Jody Windsor, she was really cool, introduced me to a lot of art stuff I didn't know about. Allison was my direct boss there, and she was kind of a bon vivant going around the city. And when I showed up, I had no sense of style. I couldn't hold a conversation with a stranger, and they kind of all flocked to me and were like, "Oh, we have to help him.
Oh, that's nice.
He's not going to make it like this." So they would teach me, like, let's go to a bar and we can do this. And went to some nice restaurants, and all that first stuff of being like getting a really expensive meal in someone else's expense account and all that kind of thing. So I have a lot of fond memories of the place and the people there, and I'm still like social media friends with a lot of the folks that I worked with while they were there. But like Mark, he came in actually writing, and that was certainly an ambition of mine. See, I didn't know what I wanted to do, John. I came out of NYU.
Okay.
I have a film degree, which is about as useful as a Starbucks receipt, right? So you're like, well, what do you do? Do you just like apply to like be a director? Is there the director applicant? That didn't exist. So I was like, well, I guess I write. Well, who does writing? Magazines have writing in them, but I can never really crack the egg, and Mark is an accomplished journalist, and in a lot of ways, has a real gift with the page. So I wasn't able to kind of go into those things, but I really enjoyed the mailroom.
Well, I can share your frustration coming out with a degree where you're like, all right, now what? Because with my broadcast background, I had a communications degree, and I tell all of my friends that have kids going in, and it's like, they don't need that. Just let them work at the radio station. And I'm sure you had, opportunities to make small movies as well. So I mean, at least you had that. And also the great thing is, and it's funny because as we talk about magazines, and certainly, God, that's been a conversation. I had Drew Friedman on last week, and we we're talking about how, the magazine rack is disappearing, and even digitally and everything. I don't know what impact it makes, but it's but thankfully, as far as filmmaking goes, isn't it great that the technology has gotten more affordable? And maybe, when you were still in, school and everything, you'd have to think about renting a camera or whatever.
That's the relationship, right? So I don't think we talk enough about the relationship between art and technology and how it's been historical, whether we're talking about the Gutenberg press and the ability to like mass produce literature.
Yes.
Which was a huge watershed moment, right? I mean, that was state of the art technology at the time, or, sort of any of the things, right? Think about comics. For the 90% of the history of comic books, you had to draw on paper, and paper cost money. That vellum that my friend Nelson, would always be using in Starbucks. And I remember, like, when I was in New York and I first met a lot of people in comics: Nelson Blake, Vincent Spencer, Afua Richardson, Chris Dabari, Chris Cross, Joe Illidge, Walter McDaniel. These were all people I met in my early burglary days in NYC. And I would go into Starbucks, and this is back when they wanted you to stay there. And they had these huge they don't want you to stay there now. They just want you to pay like $8 for a coffee and keep it moving, pal. But back in the day, they would have these huge tables and plenty of plugs. And so you'd go into the Starbucks in Astor Place, A Street. You'd walk in there, and all of these comic book artists would just be sitting in a circle with those illuminated tables plugged into the wall with the vellum on top of it. And they would just be drawing.
Yeah.
It was wonderful because, and that's how I met these guys. Like, I got into comics. Nelson Blake is responsible for me getting into comics. Because
remind me of the book that you and Nelson did together.
We did a book together called Romulus.
Yes. Do I have Romulus?
And we've worked
bring it up in a second.
We've worked together on other things. Like, he did an issue of Michael Cray, the Luthor Wonder Woman thing that I was doing there. It's like this whole thing on a yacht. I love it because it's all sexy and everything. And his work is like super sexy. So he's responsible for me getting into comics because I couldn't get arrested in comics. Like, I had tried all the stuff, like sending the scripts in, whatever, going to the con, then nothing worked. But when I met Nelson, there we go. That's Romulus. So when I met Nelson there, he was really open and inviting, and he was such a gifted artist even back then. He was so good. And he, introduced me to other people in comics, and I got to meet Walter McDaniel from him, and from Walter, I was able to meet other people, right? So, I really do credit Nelson for my comic book career, honestly, because I didn't really know how the doors would be open. So for those playing the at-home game, if you're a writer and you're trying to get into comics, you have to befriend artists. You don't have to, but strategically, I would suggest that. Find artists who are cool, that you like, whose work you really like. They don't have to be really well known. But if you think there's a great quality to their work, figure out how you can collaborate. A lot of artists have something they want to turn into a story. Some of them write, many of them don't. Many of them have the mechanics of a story, the bits and pieces of it, but their discipline is visual art, right? So if you're a storyteller, you can say, hey, what if I help write a 4-issue miniseries of this world that you've built? We can collaborate on story, and I can do the scripting. We can kind of work back and forth and build it together. And then you have something that you're working with together. And when you have art, it is much easier to get people to read your work. Because until then, it's homework for any editor, for anything like, until you have like a name. I'm not a great name, but I have like a little bit of a name. So like, it's a little easier to get people to read something of mine, now. But I remember when it was impossible. And having a piece of art that goes along with it is a really great idea. So, use Twitter. I mean, for as long as it's there, use, whatever social media you can. When you go to conventions, you can obviously stand in a line for 2 hours, so you can meet, Phil or Bryan Hitch or whatever it is, you're all about, right? Definitely get your Joel Jones, whatever, Lady J, has on offer at her table for sure. But don't ignore some of your smaller tables and lesser known artists, because
Absolutely.
in comics, people bump up super quick. So, if you see someone's work and there's a quality to it you like, figure out a way to collaborate. Another thing, just real quick, while I'm on my little spiel.
No, I love this. Please.
Is even if let's say, write a comic book script and then the artist has to draw and the rest of it, that can be a months-long process. It can take a year to get that book done because, they may have a day job they got to do. You might have a day job you got to do, 2 day jobs in this economy, whatever's going on, right? What you can do is find an artist whose work you like, who has original sketches. Not mainline DC, Marvel, whatever, but usually they'll have like some original stuff.
Yeah.
Right? Approach them and say, hey, would you be cool with me writing a prose short story based on this sketch? And if I wrote it and you read it and liked it, could I put that up on a Squarespace? And would you link to it from your social media account? And I'll link to it from my social media account. And at least then you're giving people like a New Yorker type experience where you have an illustration that's already done. So the artists don't really have to generate anything new. They just have to give you digital permission to use it on a website, right? You're generating the prose, but you might get people to read that. I did that back in the blogger days. I had a thing called aggressive fiction, and it was short stories. And what I would do is I would go DeviantArt. I don't even know if DeviantArt is still.
Yes. No, go on. Yes.
I haven't been DeviantArt in a long, long time.
Neither have I, but I hear what you're saying. Continue.
I'm still a deviant, but I just haven't been to that website. So I would go there and I would just spend a couple hours, with like a coffee or whatever, and I would just reach out to artists whose work I thought was cool, and I would say, hey, would you mind if I use this on a thing and do the thing? And 90% of the time they were like, sure, because you're not costing them anything.
No.
But then their fan base, even if it's just a couple hundred people, right? That's a couple hundred people that, may tune in and read what you wrote. And then they might share what you wrote. And so I built up a little readership on that blog by just writing short stories that were inspired by these images, giving people kind of a magazine experience. And I guess that kind of came out of that time I was working in men's magazines.
But that's interesting because, oh God, now I'm blanking on the Neotext is essentially doing that right now.
Yeah.
There's a lot of familiar names of artists and writers that are writing prose, but with spot illustration here and there.
For sure.
That's a brilliant idea, man. And honestly, and I was going to say also, it's kind of proof of concept because if your audience and the artist's audience like your short story and the image, then, hey, a miniseries could happen or whatever. Josh.
Oh, yeah. And you've got like Reddit and there's so many different ways you can promote now. And these days, people are optioning things from everywhere, right? It's not just you publish a book and then Hollywood buys the book. Hollywood's looking, on this website, that website. If it's an intellectual property that has cinematic potential, there is someone out there kind of looking for it. So you never know what's going to happen.
That's great, man. No, honestly. And Bryan, honestly, I always appreciated that you have been very giving with advice on writing, on filmmaking and things. I know you were making YouTube videos.
I was, yeah. I haven't in a while, but I will get back to it. I've just been so busy.
Yeah, man. Hey, good. I mean, honestly, and I'm sure that was a good exercise for you to generate content and from that standpoint. But again, it was also giving. But yeah, you're allowed to you're allowed to
Well,
succeed and do your thing.
technology's different now. So what I'll likely do is kind of what you're doing. I'll just stream or something, like tell people like, hey, I'm going to be on this stream playing Gotham Knights. Hit me with questions while I'm just walking around Gotham City beating people up or something, and just kind of make it a little more loose. That way it's something that I can do on a regular basis. I don't have to produce it, but I can still answer people's questions in real time. Or if people ask me questions on Twitter or something, I can remember them and then just kind of go to them, while I'm doing like a gaming stream or whatever I'm doing, because it's all about, for me, the social media content game is all about what is easy for me to do consistently. Like anyone can do one video, right? And, you can get it edited and sound effects and the rest of it, but there's just one video. But you got to make a video every week or twice a month, or, or talking about Philip DeFranco, you're making one like twice a day or something, right? And so now I think it's about what kind of format can I use that I can do if I have a cold? I can do if I had to work 6 hours that day. Anyone can do something incredible once. But you can't just put that one video up and just wait for the clicks to come in. You got to kind of figure out, what is your easily replicatable format, and then just continue to do that.
Well, yeah, you just described Word Balloon, obviously, and coming from radio and doing radio 5 days a week, it's pretty easy for me to set these things up. And God, I'm trying to do the math right now. So today's Tuesday. Well, I guess I've only had 2 so far. Well, no, I take that back. On Sunday, I spoke to Franco and Mark Laming.
Oh, nice.
And then yesterday I spoke to Elsa Chartier, talking to you today. My good buddy Jesse Rogers, who's the ESPN baseball analyst, is coming on tomorrow night. Yeah, I got a full week, man. Yeah, oh yeah. Well, 30 years in sports radio, man. I can't help it. I'm gonna dip into sports every now and then. My buddy Nigel Collins, who wrote an amazing boxing essay book, he's going to be coming on next Monday. And that's my jam, man.
Have you ever read I forgot what it's called, but now I'm going years back, but back when I was in New York and I used to work at HarperCollins in the sub rights department. Again, I'm in a room filling up boxes. Like, it's not, trust me, like don't start thinking it's like some cool like metropolitan job. No. I was in ill-fitting Dockers, like looking through contracts for like Lemony Snicket or something. I don't even remember. But there was a book called Rope Burns. And
no, I don't know this book. Please tell me.
It was written by a guy named FX Tool with an E at the end. And as I recall, it was nonfiction essays on boxing.
Wonderful.
That I thought were really cool. This is back when I thought I was going to be some East Coast literati.
I'm with you, man. I was hoping to be a Chicago literati. I get it.
Yeah,
totally.
I was like reading that Gates Lee's Frank Sinatra story.
Oh my God, I love that.
You know what I'm talking about? Like
Frank Sinatra. Yes, anyone can look that up on Google. Fantastic Gates Lee's profile of mid-60s Sinatra.
We can talk about comic books now. We don't want to talk about Gates.
No, but I love this.
Lose everybody.
I do, honestly, man. The tangents are always welcome.
Yeah. But that was like, so anyway, the book is called, if you're interested in boxing, anyone watching or listening, it's called Rope Burns. And it was, I think it was compiled by FX Tool. I don't think all of them were his work. I think it was a bit of a compilation or something, but it was cool. It was cool.
Excellent. All right. Now, and again, I love where we went with all of that. Don't apologize, but we'll go back to Titans. And before we leave Nightwing, I really want to point out, and this is more second and third season,
for sure,
but the Dick Bruce Wayne relationship, the way it was explored on Titans, was so fantastic. And you'll give me the actor's name here that played Bruce.
Oh, Ian Glenn.
Yeah, Ian Glenn, of course, from Game of Thrones and so many other great things. Man, I at first, obviously, everyone looks and goes, it's just like when Daniel Craig was Bond, and everyone's like, I don't know, man. When you just see him. But then he starts speaking, and it's like, no, that's Bruce Wayne, man. And also, that's damaged Bruce Wayne, who is much more interesting than, don't worry, hand it to Batman. Batman solves everything. Godzilla versus Batman. You know, I mean, I love that.
Batman
you
would win.
You know the nerd matchups, man. It's like Batman always has a plan, and Batman will.
At the end of the day, Dick, it's just a big lizard. So,
talk about that relationship, because truly.
So one of the things that we get to
that was
do,
amazing,
because we're not a Batman show, and we'll never be a Batman show, and because of that, we're allowed to explore Bruce in some different ways, and so most of the time, whether you're looking at the Batman, or you're looking at '89 Batman, you're casting Batman.
Right.
We were really just casting Bruce and thinking of him as a father figure, his relationship to Jason, his relationship to Dick. And so having that true north, let us approach the character in a different way. And look, I'm a huge Batman fan, and I've written Batman in multiple forms at this point. And I certainly have my own perspective on the character, which shows up very much so in Batman and the Outsiders and my Detective Comics stuff, what have you.
Absolutely.
And the Titan stuff is different than that, but for me, it was really freeing to explore it. Batman's a bit like Hamlet. Everyone has a different way they do to be or not to be. Is it Hamlet, with the machinations, or is it Hamlet the madman? Is it Hamlet the impetuous child? Well, Bruce is a little bit like that. And now we have our kind of almost like 90s goth inspired Bruce Wayne, that Pattinson was doing in Matt Reeves' movie, which I thought was excellent. So, and then Ian is such a nice guy. Like, I remember the first time I met him, we'd done some shooting for the day, and the whole crew was there for it, because it was one of those, like, Dick can see Bruce and no one else can, and Bruce is in the room and they're all there. It was a season 2 thing, Deathstroke season. After that, we all went to the Shangri-La, I think, the hotel in Toronto, and Ian was there just holding court, just telling great stories. And you're just going to sit there and you'll listen to every story he has to tell. Like, as I was just, refilling my glass of wine and be like, Ian, tell me again about the snow. It was amazing.
Dude, I'm telling you, really, again, those conversations with Dick, Barbara, Jason are just great. And yeah, you really get, like you said, Hamlet, the tragedy of Bruce Wayne, I think, in terms of, yeah, sure, he's an amazing Batman. And as we all know, Bruce Wayne is the guise, Batman is the real person. But therein lies the flaw in Bruce Wayne and Batman, that he doesn't know how to relate. And he's been a dysfunctional father to all these people. And God, I love that scene where they're going through, or Dick's going through the files, and he sees Carrie Kelly's name and some other names. And it's like, well, who are these? Well, they're potential sidekicks. And Dick's like, you're going to put another kid through this bullshit again? What the hell? And that's what's intriguing about now introducing Tim. And now maybe, again, as Bruce tells Dick, I need you to be a better Batman and stuff. And I guess Tim, the way that he is being presented in Titans, is an opportunity for Dick to, help a kid in a more, and certainly he's doing that for all of them. And he is the father figure of the group. But yeah, go ahead.
So Tim's played by Jay Lycurgo, who is just a phenomenal dude. He's so cool. He's like a billion times cooler than I could ever hope to be, and he always like kind of plays it down, He's like early Drake, before like Drake really knew he was Drake. In like 6 years, Jay will know he's Drake and he'll be totally different, but still cool. He'll just, just be living out loud with it. But yeah, it's a lot about how do you break the cycle of trauma, right? And, it's sort of like you had Bruce, who was alone in a lot of ways. I personally feel like he did have a father in Alfred. He just never formally recognized it as such. And Alfred would never tarnish the memory of Thomas Wayne to declare that. But Bruce was loved by a paternal figure growing up, even if he was focused on his grief and vengeance and the rest of it. And then you have Dick, who had Bruce and Alfred. and then Jason sort of had Dick, Alfred, and Bruce, and that sort of went sideways, because Jason just kind of came in later, right? And so he had more behavior when he came in, and it was a little different, right? And so with the Titans, you have an even more wider extended family. So when we think about Tim Drake, I think a lot of Tim's goodness that we always talk about in the comics and all of that, I think that comes from he walked into a larger family. And he had more support and more people that could reflect that experience back to him. And to me, Tim Drake symbolically is sort of like, this one might get it right. He won't burn his suit like Dick did. Maybe, he won't fall like Jason did. He won't wind up isolated like a Bronte-like figure like Bruce is. Tim might get this superhero duality thing right by virtue of the village of people in his life.
Understood. And also now let me give some agency to the women.
For sure.
Absolutely. Now, obviously Raven's story.
Tegan!
Indeed. And man, she's great. And man, I'm always happy to watch these actors grow up, literally.
Sure.
And truly, as she gets older, I think she only gets more comfortable in the role. Very interesting what's going on with her and Mother Mayhem. And, obviously kind of losing her mojo right now, at least as of episode 3. And her kind of finally kind of living a human life, which I love. I think that's a great idea.
Sure.
And I love that scene where she and Gar are eating breakfast and she's literally drinking maple syrup. She's like, wow, is this what it's like for you every day? And I just love that. I think that's because truly, again, in the first season, I'm like, I get it. I don't know if I'm going to like this character. And honestly, I came in with a lot of doubts. I won't deny that. Brian.
Sure.
And I thought, and I suppose subconsciously, some preconceived notions. But truly, the great thing is, again, the writing and the actors just elevate these characters. And now I totally root for Rachel. She's great.
Well, it's I love writing Rachel. I'm always chomping at the bit to get a Rachel heavy episode, because I like horror. I like her power set. I like the spookiness about the character, but I also like, her sincerity, her compassion, and a character who may have been created for a nefarious purpose, who rejects that and decides to take a path of compassion and empathy and heroism. I think that's an important story, right? Because, some of us aren't fortunate enough to be born into nurturing, productive circumstances. And many of us who like comics had a difficult childhood one way or another. I'm part of the Dead Dad Club, right? So like that was kind of my relationship to comics, but a lot of people are going through a lot of different things. And a character who sort of stands for, you can chart your own path. You don't have to be, tied into the lineage of wherever you came from if that offends you in some way. You can be more, do more, be better, that kind of thing. And she as a character, she kind of represents that, at least for me. And I love playing with that. That's why we look at episode 2 of this season that I wrote. It's very Rachel centric. It's all about her pursuit of someone who's terrorizing kids. And if you're a longtime viewer of the show, there is a little parallel, right? There's a bookending a little bit between who she is in episode 2 of season 4 and who she was in the beginning of season 1. Now she's not the one that's being comforted by the police officers, right? She's not the one now she's helping someone else do it. And that speaks to the nature of her anger at the end of that episode, right? Because she knows exactly what Arya, that little girl, is going through because she went through it. And those kinds of writing opportunities to explore that stuff is great. And then just speaking personally about Tegan, she's amazing. So when I came on to Titans, I was a staff writer. I didn't know anything about television. I mean, I worked on one season of Evil Dead, and I loved it and worked for a guy named Mark Verheiden, who's one of the most beautiful human beings I've ever met in life. Like, I would take multiple bullets for Mark Verheiden. You know, if it's between me staying around and Mark Verheiden staying around, get rid of me, because Mark is just a better human being to have on earth, right? And he was so patient the first week I was there. I didn't know what I was doing. It's a whole different other story, but he was great. But it was only a half-hour thing. You know, it was a little different than an hour-long, you know, intensely serialized, what have you. So I was still getting my sea legs up underneath me when I went to Toronto, and Tegan was, you know, young then. And so I kind of felt most comfortable, you know, kind of talking to her among the cast, because it felt kind of, you know, new, right? Like, it sort of felt that way. And she just did such a good job with everything that it makes it really easy to write her character. And that's one of the things about the cast that I really like, is I like everybody. And when I like everybody, I mean, look, you have to write for people you don't like in life. That's the job, right?
Certainly.
But when you really do genuinely like and respect the actors, and you study what they do and you learn from the choices they make, it becomes easier to kind of write for them, to showcase the things about them that you'd like them to show on screen, you know. And I've had conversations with Brenton about this, Tegan about this, you know, like, what would you like to evoke here? Okay, so let's approach it this way when you're on set, or we can do that, you know. And now we're at a place where there is a little bit of that shorthand, where I can like scratch my nose, and Ryan Potter, Gar Logan, he's like, oh, you want, and I'll be like, yeah, Ryan, can we get a little that, right? And they're like, yeah, you know. And then like, boom, because Ryan and I are, you know, we're friends, right? And so
cool,
you know, and it just makes it so much easier to do, and everyone is so incredibly gifted.
That's great to hear too, because a lot of times, I mean, I spent my years in podcasting where I'd go to the press junkets and speak to actors, and certainly a lot of the people in the press circle would be like, well, what do you think's going to happen next with your character? And 90% of the times, like, I don't know, I get the script that week and they tell me, and you know, and without any lack of responsibility of what they're bringing to it, but they're just like, I don't know, you know, whatever. So it's really great to hear that now in season 4, you know, especially I'm sure was in
that again, that's all credit to Greg Walker, right? You know, it's the showrunner's prerogative to inform people of the creative direction of the show, and different showrunners have different approaches, you know, but Greg is very consistent about what kind of wanting people to know what he's thinking, also absorbing their thoughts. You know, the actors come into the writer's room at the beginning of, well, digitally, you know, because we were Zooming, but when we were meeting in person, they would come in. And I can't tell you, like, it makes such a difference just to be able to sit with them as people and just kind of get a sense of who they are before you're on set, you know, but before you're writing scripts, because it all, even if consciously you don't really know it, you're picking up things on a subconscious level. You're picking up the experience of being in a room with them and how you're doing, and your writer brain is already starting to key into things. But you know, that's because Greg goes through the extra effort of doing that for our sake as writers working for him, as much as for the actors and everything else. You know, so I've picked up a lot of things from Greg over the years that I certainly plan to incorporate into my career going forward, because they're just super good habits.
That's great, man. And by the way, real fast, Mark Verheiden has been on Word Balloon before.
Oh, he's awesome.
And yeah, I'm a massive fan of his TV work and his comic book work.
Well, next time you talk to Mark, you tell him that I think he's amazing. I'm going to email him tomorrow and tell him I talked to you, and I think he
may not remember me, man. I'll be honest, because it's been a while. Falling Skies, when he was doing that TNT
show.
Yeah,
no, he's got a good memory, Mark. I mean,
well, maybe he'll remember that. But I've certainly republished his interviews with me, because he was one of the best Galactica writers for Ron Moore.
I know, he's amazing. That show. And he's you know, this is going to be like a 30-second Mark Verheiden love fest.
Please.
He's amazing because he's so good, but he's also the most down-to-earth person you can imagine.
That's great.
You know, and you know, you forget that he wrote this episode and wrote that episode, and and he wrote like the Daredevil Punisher stage play on the roof episode. Like, he's just dude's crazy talented. So
Yeah.
you know,
No, I'm with you, man. That's a time cop back in the day.
yeah,
Was he? Yeah, and the mask, obviously, and
yeah. He's just, I mean, he's just, he's what the kids would call a beast.
I'm with you, man. I'm so with you. That's great. Well, Corey, obviously, I think again, a character that has really only gotten better, and certainly now, I love, man. Even in the 3 episodes we've gotten so far, she's been great, and also this weird thing of whatever Lex was cooking with her before Lex died.
Sure.
Yeah, I think that mystery, and also as we get into Connor too. But talk about Corey for a second.
Well, it's hard to talk about Corey on the show without just talking about Anna.
Certainly.
Anna Diop, who plays Corey. Anna has such a natural, regal quality. Like, literally, being in her presence makes you stand up straighter. Like, your posture gets better. You start enunciating more. It's like being like in a room with like Lady Di or something. You just get on your P's and Q's when she's around,
Okay.
And I think that plays into the kind of the otherworldly aspects of the character, and the idea of destiny and being separated from your home world and trying to make a new place a home with this new family. I think all these things are universally relatable, ideas. And again, like, it speaks to, I think, some of the experiences we have to go through in life where we have to transplant.
Yeah.
I mean, I was a Missouri kid and became a New York guy, and now I'm an LA guy, right? And you're always transplanting and, kind of forging these new relationships and kind of wondering, like, what's my rhythm here? And how do I kind of find my flow? And all that stuff is really interesting to explore. Her relationship to Dick Grayson is interesting to explore. I'm not going to say anything more about her relationship to Dick Grayson because I've got a billion people that are waiting on every word, but it's interesting to explore, right? And she, and it's just a super fun character to write, because Starfire has a confidence I certainly don't have. So it's easy for me to project myself into that and kind of live vicariously through Starfire. And Anna's just wonderful. I'm going to plug her movie for a second. So Anna is starring in a movie called Nanny. It's a brilliant film. It's a horror film, but really thoughtful horror film. And it is an Amazon exclusive premiering in December. It's won all types of awards. I think it won Sundance or something crazy like that. And she's wonderful in it. It's directed beautifully. Nick Yada, the director, is amazing. So everyone just, pay attention for it, look for it. And when it premieres on Amazon in December, you better stream it and then tweet me about how much you liked it.
Very cool, man. That's great. I got to go. Well, first of all, because this will be quick.
Yeah.
But as I've said in the last couple of days on Twitter, the only crypto you should believe in is Crypto the dog. And
that is true.
And I love that not only are we getting Connor, but I'm sorry. You'll forgive the personal note here, but when I was a little kid, we got a Cocker Spaniel, and really it was my sister's dog. And my dad's like, "What do you want to name it?" And I'm like, "Crypto. Come on, Crypto." Yeah, and of course, my sister's like, "No way." And she named him Whiskers, which was fine, but because he was really fast, so we all called him Whisk, which was kind of fun.
That's cute.
A little cooler than just Whiskers. It's like,
I have a German Shepherd mix puppy, whose name is Leia because I'm a nerd. And so I was like,
sure, man.
I was like, she's got to be Princess Leia. I have no choice, right?
But let's, but yeah.
And so shout out to Melissa, the dog trainer for us. She's wonderful and does such a good job with Crypto. And so does that next young man you're about to put on the screen, Josh Orpin, who is both wonderful with everyone and Crypto.
That's great. And again, I love the use of Crypto, but truly Josh is doing a hell of a job as Connor. And I really, I love what we've gotten so far regarding his relationship with Lex, Titus Welliver. And again, the last guy I would cast to be Lex Luthor, and has killed it with what we've gotten. And I just like the Bruce Dick relationship. Again, Lex's conversation with Connor and with Corey, for that matter, just great stuff. And really, just like these people aren't evil 24/7 or whatever. And of course, there's a plan. It's Lex Luthor, so I'm not saying that he's I'm your father, whatever. But there's probably a kernel of truth in that, as he explains to Connor.
Yeah, well, when I think about Lex Luthor, he does villainous stuff, but I see him in a little bit of a different way, right? Like I have a theory that for every multiple $100 million you have, you get a little more crazy. Right? I just think like once you have like $500 million, you're essentially just living a completely different existence than everyone. I mean, really 100 million, but like 500 million money doesn't even matter. That's half a billion. When you have access to $1 billion, now you're an alien, right? You're just in a different whole place, right? So what use conscience at that point? But Lex, for me, is the ultimate Randian figure. He is John Galt in comic book form in a lot of ways, right? Pure objectivism. And so, and like in everything in life, well, not everything in life, but in most things in life, there is a bit that's useful. And then if you take it too far, it gets in the way, right? And so, Lex is a little too far in the objectivism scale. But I never feel like Luthor is a character that is completely devoid of ethics. It's just in a sociopathic way, he will not let ethics inconvenience his goals, right? He would rather not do anything bad, but occasionally, or most of the time, some of the stuff he wants to do, he has to do some bad stuff on the way, right? Which is different than, Joker or a character that you could really describe as a sadist in some way. And I don't think Luthor is a sadist. I just think he has decided that nothing is more important to him than what he wants, and lives his life that way. And just on Titus, I did not get to meet Titus when I was up in Toronto producing my episode because of the way the schedules crossed. But I was so happy when he came aboard, because I've just been a huge fan of Titus Welliver for a long time. He was always that actor that just stole the scene he was in. And I remember him like Runaway Jury, like you're just walking away from that thinking about Titus Welliver. I'm not thinking about Cusack and Rachel Weisz. I'm thinking about Titus Welliver, and in Bosch, he's really great. And so, yeah, one of the most beautiful parts about being able to work in a show like this is you get to meet cool people or work with cool people, or have, cool people, kind of reading your words and doing that kind of thing. And it's an incredible feeling. It really is. Who's
the casting director on Titans?
Okay, so we have Jason, and then Bly, and they work out of LA. And they are very, very good. And help manage all of this stuff. I mean, there's so many shows in production these days that
100%, yes,
everyone is in demand now for a thing. And now that there's a lot of equivalency between theatrical and streaming or television or whatever you want to call it, it's just hard to find people. And so casting is incredibly difficult. Like Lisa, we found for Jinx, she's wonderful. And that is a big part of, what Jason and Bly were able to do.
That's great. I will get a picture of Jinx. I'm limited on what I can show, and that's because I also wanted to get some comic book covers in there and stuff. But no, she's really great too. I think, again, I think these characters, and then of course Mother Mayhem.
Franca Potente. Yeah. Well, I mean, okay, I'm super professional most of the time. I am. I'm super cool. I'm Joe Cool.
Right.
But occasionally you meet someone And you have seen them in movies a lot, right? And so, being a huge Bourne fan, like meeting Franca Potente in person was kind of a moment for me. And she's so cool and interesting and funny. And she's also a director as well.
So wait, is it? Would she also run Lola Run?
Run Lola Run,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Okay.
God. Yeah.
And again, well, to her strength as a character actor, and I don't mean to sound disrespectful, but yeah, I mean, no, when he said Born Identity, I'm like, wait a minute, that's the same woman from Run Lola Run.
She's Marie, and she's also in Run Lola Run, right? And it's kind of a full circle moment, John, right? Like, you're sitting next to her on set talking about the character, or just, shooting the crap about what craft service has to eat that day, whatever it is. And then you think back to like years ago when you were broke and eating ramen noodles, scrounging up quarters to rent the Bourne Identity from the local Hollywood Video, right?
You're killing me. Go on.
And I told her about that, and then we had a good laugh about it, just about how crazy all of that is, But yeah, she brings a really wonderful, unpredictable quality to Mother Mayhem, to May Bennett, and she embraced it with so much vigor, just kind of coming into that character, and it's just awesome to watch her work, and to be able to write scenes for her is a real honor, because you just admire these people's work so much, and you always have to pinch yourself when you see them speaking your words in a way that is much better than you ever imagined it could be, because they are actors, and we are but writers, right? And it's always just kind of just an awe-inspiring thing.
Well, all right. So in general, 10-episode season. How many episodes this season?
I believe we have 12, but we're doing it in 2 parts this season. So there's a first half break, then second half, I believe.
Oh, wow. How long of a break is it?
I don't know.
Okay.
Yeah, it's what you'll find about me, John, is I only really know the stuff I have to know, because I just have too many things in my brain. Most of it's not useful, which is another frustration. But
who are you talking to, Bryan?
Yeah.
Come on. Seriously.
My Hannibal Lecter memory palace needs a spring cleaning.
Oh my God, I'm so with you, man. I know. Although I had for Halloween, I was with my older cousins, and I like carpenters, construction guys, very, very handy. And then there's, Johnny Idiot here who, can tell you about 1960s television chapter and verse. And they're like, well, at least you found a place for it where it's actually useful. And I'm like, yeah. Hi.
So listen up, kids. Success in life is about finding a career that respects your trivia.
100%. God, what's crazy, Bryan? I played on Netflix today. There's an interactive trivia game that they just posted. And I'm like, wait a minute. Is this like, it's not a show. You can play. And I think the first,
really?
I don't remember the name of it. Maybe somebody in the chat knows. But honestly, it was a blast playing it. And I'm sure I'll play it again.
In 8 months, when I have some free time, I'll take a look at it.
I understand. Well, all right, good. Now, and again, so we've got another 3 episodes before the break, I'm assuming.
Yeah.
So
I
that's
think so. I think I don't know. There's some kind of whatever.
I hear you, man.
It's on the internet. You can look it up.
Yeah. All right, everybody. And maybe I'll have it in the, for the close of this episode. But I also want to acknowledge, obviously, what you've been doing in comics. And I'm so glad you had a one-shot for Black Panther come out last week. So that's great.
Well, see, I love writing comics. And because, comics that's really responsible for my love of storytelling. Because I read a lot of comics growing up. And so it's, in a lot of ways, it's my first love. But I just don't have the time to do a bunch of monthly books. I just can't. I can't do that with the screenwriting and the TV stuff, and I got some filmmaking stuff I'm working on. But Will Moss, the editor of that, reached out to me and said, "Hey, Bryan, would you be interested in doing a Black Panther one-shot?" And I'm like, "Well, who wouldn't be interested in doing a Black Panther one-shot? Like, that's a no-brainer." Yes. And and I had some, look, we all have ideas about different characters, so I had a couple things jotted down in one of my, maybe I'll get to it one day journals about T'Challa and a villain and this kind of mythological artifact, like that kind of thing, Um, and I felt like, I can, table that in this story. One of the things I try to do, even if I'm just doing a one shot, is I try to expand the universe I'm working in a little bit, so it's additive. So there are things that if people want to pick up on them and run with, they can. Or if Marvel's like, hey, there was a really good reception of this, would you like to do some more? There's something to build on, right? Because I firmly believe as a comic book writer, you do have to honor the spirit of the character that you're working with. I try to very much. I don't try to imprint myself upon a character too much. I mean, some of yourself always comes out of it, but I feel like Batman should feel like Batman. Superman should feel like Superman. I'm a little old school that way. But I also feel like you want to leave the house with a little more than you found it. Because if we all do that as storytellers, then we're all helping each other find more and more things, And so I was like, told Will, like, well, I can, this new villain I want to do, and there's a little backstory there that we may not even use in the book, but I know what it is. I can send it over. If somebody wants to access that, they can. That's sort of how I approach this stuff, so that I'm always, expanding rather than narrowing down or funneling down. Even some of the things that people didn't like that I wrote, like Fallen Angels, for instance, the X-Men book that people just generally did not like. Although some people did like it, and thank you very much, and thank you everyone for reading. Even then, when Zeb came in and did Hellions afterwards, there were still things there that he could have used, that he used a little bit for Psylocke if he wanted to. So I think that's the kind of pay it forward aspect of working on these worlds and characters that are going to change hands, is kind of making sure that the next lady, the next guy, they've got some take it or leave it choices, but they have some choices that are there. So that's what I try to do in that one shot. And then Alberto Face, I've never actually spoken his last name aloud, but he's brilliant, and it's a great visual storyteller. I tend to write very open comic book scripts visually, where screenwriting habit, right? So I put enough detail so that you can see a version of what's in my head, but I don't expect you to do exactly what's in my head. And I have nothing against that, and if you read like a Grant Morrison script or something like that, it's super detailed about where everything needs to be.
Sure.
I just frankly don't enjoy writing like that. It's just not as fun. So I love working with artists where I can give them indication, so they have something to build from, but also there's plenty of room for them to have space and interpret and bring their own visual storytelling to the table.
Well, one of my favorite things you wrote, only 9 issues, was American Carnage. And Luis wanted to know, is there potential for more American Carnage?
Well, there's potential in a couple ways, right? So would I revisit, that world and do another series? Sure. I'm, the way that series ended, I feel like that story and perhaps those characters might largely be wrapped up a little bit, but a couple of the characters would carry over and we could discuss different things. If I were to do like another run of it, I probably wouldn't be approaching insidious white supremacy like as opposed to the sugary and very flavorful and pleasant white supremacy. That was a little redundant. But I probably wouldn't do that again, but might explore different things, and kind of different aspects of the American criminal diaspora, with some of the same characters perhaps walking through, but a whole new cast of characters as well. So that would be interesting to me creatively to do. I would want to do it with Leandro because we kind of wrote hard together on that one with Pat
Okay.
and with Dean White and the rest of it. And it would be, I think we'd have to get the band back together a little bit to justify it. But there's also the potential for media adaptation.
That would be great, man.
And I can't really speak to that specifically, but I will say that it is, on the mind. And we'll see kind of where that goes. That would be certainly more rooted in the events of that first run,
certainly,
which would likely be the exploration of a series, But I've always looked at American Carnage not as a response necessarily to the day in which it was written, but as an opportunity to have, it's sort of like My American Horror Story,
Sure.
Except it deals with the criminal diaspora and the nooks and crannies of, American society. That's kind of how I looked at it.
I understand. Was it traded? I know you can get it. People can find the loose issues, but also obviously things like Comixology or DC Universe, you could probably read it that way, I'm assuming. But yeah, is there a trade of the 9 issues?
Yeah, I believe there is.
Okay, I wasn't certain.
Is there? Well, not a collector. There's two trades. I'm not sure if we have a full on because the whole Vertigo thing was weird, right? So
yeah, you were there when the Vertigo house was on fire.
I killed Vertigo.
You did not. Shut up.
Entirely my fault. Entirely my fault.
No, that was really.
I just Elon Musked it. I just
so did not.
Came in there and just turned it right on upside down. No,
that was really rough. Truly, that imprint was on fire. And so many of you were writing and drawing great stuff till the end, and no, to your credit. So I do understand what you're saying in terms of they closed the lights when you were done, but it wasn't your fault, man.
Yeah, no, for sure. Like I wish there was like a nice hardcover edition where you could just sort of sit down in a big chair and get a beer and just kind of go through it. And it might get there. Warner Brothers has been going through a lot of changes, as we all have seen.
Indeed.
And I don't think that's an impossible thing to do. I might have to get a little more famous to make that a viable thing, but more difficult stuff has happened. So let's cross our fingers and see where we can go.
I understand. And I also want to point out, because I really enjoyed your AWA book, Chariot.
Thank you.
I really did, man. I thought it was fun. I thought it was a great book. I thought it was a lot of fun. And I really appreciated this era of AWA and a lot of the output that they were doing. But no, this is a great story.
Well, when Axel Alonso, who runs AWA, is a pal of mine, and I remember when he asked me if I wanted to do a book, and you've spoken to Axel, I imagine. Right?
Love Axel.
So Axel's like, "Hey Bryan, so I got this new thing we're doing, and I would like you to do a book for us. Now, you can do whatever you would like to do. But I just want to make sure that it's something that means something to you personally, something important. We don't just want to put the books out. We want them to be important." And so I was like, okay, I have this thing I want to do. See, I love being on your show because it's the only place where my Axel Alonso plays.
That's the best Axel Alonso I've ever heard.
It's the most useless talent I have.
But we should be doing
an Axel Alonso impression, but I love the guy. I always joke with Nelson about it. It's the thing I'm best at, and it's also the most useful. I'm like the worst mutant in the world. Like, what's he do? He farts blue.
Legion of Substitute Heroes. Come
right?
on, man.
So, and that's like a palate cleanser, right? Like, if you'll notice, kind of like if you sort of look at how I work, usually I'll do like a kind of heavy thing, and then I need a palate cleanser. And then I'll do a heavy thing again, but I can't always go from heavy thing to heavy thing to heavy thing to heavy thing. Like, I love Tom King. I love him as a human being. I love his work, but I couldn't do what he does.
I hear you.
Because everything he writes is just so personal, and it's like a Dante's, Inferno journey through the psyche every time he lays something down. I just think I'd be an alcoholic after it. So after American Carnage, and I did like a little bit of Batman and the rest of it. And Batman wasn't like a heavy, but it was also Batman. So it was a little stressful. when I had an opportunity to do an original book, I just wanted to do a car story. I think, for a lot of writers, I think we all have at least one car thing in us, one car story, and Chariot was based a lot on that, and also the relationship that Jillian, the hologram that lives inside of the car, and Jim, the character, has. That's sort of analogous to a lot of the relationships, the friendships I had with dynamic, interesting, kind of take no prisoners women, over the course of like my 20s and when I was trying to figure everything out. And these weren't all like romantic relationships. A lot of them were just friendships, and sometimes they were mentoring me. And I just wanted to kind of capture a little bit of that, in that thing, and then have Neon. And Priscilla is such a great artist, and Marco, who does the colors for, is so good. Like everything Priscilla draws is a t-shirt. Every single panel could be a t-shirt. And so it's hard to not be really excited about something like that. So that was a really, really fun book to write.
That's great. You mentioned Batman, of course.
Yeah.
Kind of your backdoor pilot to your Outsiders run.
For sure.
Detective, yeah. And really great.
Well, and this is a great example, right? So, I'm coming into Detective Comics rather than, just can I get the Riddler? Can I do the thing? I'm like, well, let me make up this new guy, Karma, and just add him to the universe. He may never show up again, or maybe he has shown up again. I don't even know. But like, it just adds to the whole thing, right? And then you look at like Batman and the Outsiders. Well, that villain, Ishmael, that's in that story, he wound up on the Black Lightning television show in some form, right? Because they're mining comics for different things they can adapt. And when you have a character like Jefferson Pierce, who doesn't have a long list in his rogues gallery, anything additive is additive, and it gives people things to do. And that's just a really amazing thing to be able to do. I didn't even know Ishmael from Detective Comics was on the Black Lightning show because I was steeped in Titans, work, and I wasn't watching, all the stuff. And then someone reached out and they're like, "Yo, Bryan, your character is on that show." And I was like, "Oh, that's cool," and then I tuned in and I was like, "Oh, that's neat that they kind of figured out how to make a version of that character work in their narrative." And that's never happened to me before, and you just kind of gotta put your hands up and go, wee.
I hope you get compensated. You'll forgive me for getting personal, but we all know the stories sometimes where
I have a very good team.
Okay, all right, good to hear. And also want to acknowledge, we talked about it before.
Oh yeah, for sure.
The Killmonger miniseries and stuff, which was just terrific. Great use of the Kingpin as well as Killmonger, and a really great look at his backstory. Loved it.
Yeah, it was interesting, right? Because when Marvel reached out to me and asked me if I would be interested in doing a Killmonger miniseries, initially I wasn't. And mainly because I just felt like, Coogler and Jordan had done such good work with that character in that movie.
Absolutely.
That I just didn't know what would be interesting. But then when they were open to something that happened earlier in his life, formative experiences, that was really interesting because that allowed me to kind of escape the gravitational pull of the Killmonger we have in the films, or that we've come to expect within the Black Panther comics. And I wanted to dimensionalize him a little bit. Yes, there is a kind of Black supremacy thing running through him for sure. That is an aspect of Eric's character, but that doesn't mean that he couldn't have had interesting relationships cross-culturally along the way. And taking him and kind of weaving him into this sort of criminal group of, and I really like to just like this notion that some people have some ability, right? Like they're not good enough to be like Bullseye, but they've got a thing and they can probably use that to do this job, rob this bank, that kind of thing, right? On the scale of stuff. Like some people are just going to be grinders, and they're going to have a little bit of power and they're just going to want to, make a little money on the side. Like they're not super villains, they're not superheroes. They're just trying to rip off the bearer bonds and flip them,
They're opportunists.
They're opportunists, right? And that felt very Michael Mann to me, and
Yes.
so then I started getting into this whole like, Killmonger, like a Michael Mann movie, and that felt kind of interesting. And then I'm casting it in my head, and I'm putting like Gugu and Battle Raw in there, and thinking about how King is going to be De Niro from 1996, and like because in a comic book you can just cast people from all different times or whatever, just throw them all.
Absolutely,
right. And I've always loved the Kingpin. Bendis's work on Daredevil, was really important to me. Kind of coming up. And I always wanted to kind of have a touch of that character. And again, I felt like, well, this is just fun and interesting. I didn't know how people were going to receive it because it's not an experience I think you would expect from a Killmonger book.
Agreed.
But
yes,
people seem to enjoy it, at least for the most part. And I was really, really glad about that. That's one of the things that I'm really proud of is that one, because it speaks to aspects of my creativity that aren't on display in other things. It's a little sexier than my work normally gets. It does have that Michael Mann action thriller aspect to it.
Definitely.
But we do also have the comic book stuff to it. And in a strange way, Daniel Craig's Bond films were also an influence in terms of the femme fatale. Right?
Fair enough.
And that kind of relationship. And there's a little noir almost involved in there.
100%, man. Yes.
And I dig that one.
Well, I do too, man. And again, that's really, it was Killmonger, American Carnage, that kind of stuff, along with your Batman, the detective and outsider stuff.
Sure.
That's what really made me pay attention. I did want to acknowledge, because the last time we spoke, there was a film in production that you were involved with. So, and I guess now it's out on Netflix?
Yes, the film is called Zone 414, and it is based on an original script of mine that was picked up by my friend Andrew Baird. He's a filmmaker. He's an Irish filmmaker. Well, he's dual citizenship, but if you talk to him, he sounds very Irish, so I just say he's an Irish filmmaker.
Fair enough.
And then he kind of took my original script, which was this weird art film that I had intended to make. I have like a stack of things that I've written and never really shown to anyone that I intend to make at some point. And so this was one of them. And it was very experimental, almost like Lynchian, the way I was approaching on the page. And then Andrew read it. He was looking for a project to do. I had no time to try to direct the movie. And so he wanted to make his own version of it, basically. And kind of took it from me and then, kind of turned it into his own thing. And so what lives on Netflix is really like his vision of that world realized with, some of the through lines I had are still in there, but it was a really interesting experience because I got to talk to Guy Pearce, who's in the movie, Matilda Lutz. I got to speak with, and that's just like, cool stuff. And Andrew has gone on since then. He recently, his next film has been released. It's called like One Way. It's got different names in different territories, but it's One Way something in the title. It's got a Machine Gun Kelly, and it's like Dre DeMatteo, Machine Gun Kelly, Kevin Bacon, and it's sort of all set around this bus, and it's kind of a crime thriller that sort of contains Storm Reed is in there, and it's got this lurid sort of Tony Scott quality that I think Andrew has in his work, and that's a cool film, and he's doing really well, and it's it's always wild to think that you got a movie on like Netflix or something. I wake up very grateful, John. I don't quite know how I got here, but I'm grateful to be here.
It seems to be working for you, man. Honestly, it's so great. And like I said, the work you've done on Titans has stood out. Am I right? The second episode that you wrote this season, the first season one was more of a supernatural.
It
Late
was.
season one, yeah. So I mean, might we see more horror from you?
In this season.
Well, I mean in general from your work when you get to do more of your own story.
Yeah, I would very much like to. I mean, horror is one of my first loves in film. It's sort of like comics. Every genre sort of has its own community, and I'm only now kind of taking my steps towards the horror community, not because they're exclusive and they wouldn't let me sit with them. It's just I don't think people automatically understand I'm a fan of horror from the work that I've done. When you work in Hollywood, you're largely known by the last thing you did, last script you got hired to write, last TV show you worked on, last comic book you wrote, what have you. And I've got a couple things in various forms that are horror that are kind of percolating. So that side of my imagination will kind of come to the fore. But yeah. I mean, if I were to, let's say I were to direct a studio film, for instance, not an independent film. I did an independent film. It might be like a sexy drama or something, where people are talking too much. And there's a dead person somewhere. What are we going to do? It might be like that. But if I were to do a studio film, it would probably be a horror film.
Okay.
Because of the atmospherics, because of the way you can do a character study,
Yeah.
You don't need huge stars to bring people to it. Horror is more experiential. People will go see a movie because it's the scariest movie of the year, not because this famous person is in it.
Totally.
And there's a democracy to that I really admire. So I would expect to see some horror for me. And then this season of Titans has horror elements for sure. I mean, you saw shades of that in episode 2, bits and pieces of those things there too.
Well, and the threat itself of Mother Mayhem, which she represents, again, comic book fans might see clues as to where this is going beyond Mother Mayhem. I'll leave that for the Zapruder film people to examine and come up with on their own. Or
back into the left.
Exactly.
That was a JFK Oliver Stone reference for people who don't know what I was referencing. And if you haven't seen JFK by Oliver Stone, you should, because it's excellent.
One of the best films of the 90s. I so agree.
One of the best films of the 90s.
That Sutherland Costner scene on the bench
amazing.
When he's laying it all out. Oh my God. It is amazing.
I saw the movie. I went and bought the Warren Commission because I was going to solve it, John.
Bryan,
I was going to solve it.
I was involved with a show that the History Channel produced, and I swear this sounds like such a myth, but I swear to God it's true. It's only run in Canada and Germany. But the producers came to me and are like, "Hey, do you have any conspiracy stuff that you would be interested in? It can't be a ghost story or whatever." And I'm like, "Well, I'm always fascinated by Kennedy." Like, "Oh, Kennedy always sells. What do you got?" And I'm like,
that Kennedy sells like gangbusters.
Isn't it sad? I know. And again, tragedy plus time, 60 years later, this is how they're talking to me. But they're like, so I go, well, what about the Chicago connection to the conspiracy? And, the Giancana mob, and really, which also ties into the New Orleans mob and all these other things. And, Jack Ruby was part of the Giancana mob before he went to Dallas. And they told me about what they called Plan B. And I guess there were 3 points before Plan A or Plan B. I might be getting actually, I think it was Plan A. But supposedly the conspiracy theory was prior to Dallas, there were 2 other opportunities that these assassins were planning to take a shot at Kennedy. One was he was supposed to come to Chicago for an Army-Navy college football game that was played at Soldier Field.
Wow.
And he was going to come, and they made a big deal about, the president's going to be there. Watch the motorcade as it takes this route and everything. And the Secret Service detained 2 Hispanic guys when they found out that in their hotel they had air rifles, a ton of ammo, and the maid found all this and the map of the motorcade route.
Were they like Cuban immigrants or something?
They had no ID on them, but the Secret Service detained them for 2 days. They got to him by Thursday, and then there was a lone gunman, and I forget his name. That was a big John Birch, arch conservative, crazy guy. I don't mean to, normalize him by refer to him as a conservative, but when I say John Birch, what I'm talking about.
Yeah, like super far right. Yeah.
I wish Alex Jones.
I tilted my head to my own left when I said that.
So they detain him, and it's like, I'm on Saturday morning, and he's like, I'm going to work. Well, he worked at a print shop that was part of the motorcade route. The print shop was closed that day, and they searched his car, and he had it loaded with ammo and an air rifle and everything. So they detained him. The conspiracy theorists say that the Chicago Secret Service office reported back to Washington, said, Chicago's too hot, don't let the president come. But the same day, the South Vietnamese president was assassinated. So that was the official story why Kennedy didn't come to Chicago. And then about 9 days later, Plan B would have been taking a shot at him in Tampa, Florida. And I forget what happened that fell through. And then finally, Dallas was Plan C. Now, again, all this is conspiracy theory stuff. I actually got to interview Abraham Bolden, who was one of the first Black Secret Servicemen, who was based here in Chicago. But prior to that, Kennedy met him at a fundraiser, and he was working in Washington prior to being shifted to Chicago and stuff. But a fascinating guy. And he's one of the guys that during the Warren Commission report is like, hey, something's crazy here. And I'll let everyone look up what happened to poor Mr. Bolden, who had a really rough time during the 60s. And again, it's part of that conspiracy cover-up kind of story. So that was my involvement with
Is it like sometimes when I think about just like history, right? Like let's just say Oswald did it. Just for the purposes of this hypothetical conversation. I mean, I don't know if he did or not, right? He might have been part of it. He might have taken the shot. I don't know, right?
Yep.
I've seen a lot of old nutty stuff about some French dude, Lucien Sarti, that was sitting. Anyway, we can get into it. But
go on.
Let's just say Oswald took the shot that killed President Kennedy. That one guy, and what was he like in his early 30s, maybe late 20s or something like that?
Well, I mean, he had a career in the 50s in the military.
Yeah. So maybe early 30s
I would say 30s, maybe, or mid 30s, something like that. Just
this guy who, changed the entire course of history, like inflection points. I think a lot about historical inflection points, and really in more just like an objective, like, what if Al Gore had won?
What if Bobby Kennedy in 68 hadn't been?
What if Bobby Kennedy hadn't been assassinated, right? Everything would be different. And so what I tell people now is pay attention to what's going on, because we're living through inflection points right now, right? And when we go on, we'll look at it and be like, ooh, that was a big watershed moment, this thing, And during the time, it was like, whatever. But a huge thing, and you're sort of living through history. And, as, the future kind of splits into the fractals of string theory, it feels like we're experiencing a lot of these things now, but not paying a great deal of attention to them.
Agreed.
But it's just insane, to think about, like, everything would be different in a way. Like, some things would be the same. And even the theoretical, history fiction stuff that I read, I don't feel like it goes far enough in a way.
Go ahead.
I'm just, sometimes I'll read something and I'm like, okay, yes, but I think this is still too rooted in the familiar, even if I'm like, like reading a King's book, that had the Kennedy assassination in it,
Stephen King's book, sure.
Yeah.
11/22/63, yeah.
Right. I just think about, like, it's almost, you almost can't imagine. It's like, it's hard to imagine what would be different, because everything would be crazy. No, just random things I think about.
Well, and again, I know how busy you are with your own show, but I love on Apple TV For All Mankind. Because not only the specifics of the space program that they're exploring, but I love, especially the first episode of every season is like, hey, the Beatles were together in the US Festival back in the 80s or Live Aid or whatever it was. And President Gary Hart made these moves and President Ted Kennedy made these moves in the early 70s. And it's great. And I absolutely adore that show. I'm a sucker for anything astronaut involved. But it is those divergence of history moments that we get in that show that I think
we have to pay very careful attention to things that are happening like as they're growing, and like I don't mean this in like a political sense necessarily. I just mean this in terms of we didn't realize this was going to affect history the way it did. But when NBC decided to put Trump on The Apprentice, they changed the world.
You're right.
They didn't know it, right? But that was a decision that changed the world because he probably would have been president if he didn't have a primetime show, right?
100%, man. No, you're right. And what an innocuous moment, right? That brought this current history that we're living in.
Yeah, so it's not always the obvious thing, right? A lot of times it's like the weird thing that will suddenly affect everything else, and like a Sam Beckett quantum leap sort of thing. That like it's like trying to make the Terminator make sense in terms of like physics. Like you'll just break your brain if you just think about it too much. But these are the things I think about.
Well, it's Bradbury, man. It's Sound of Thunder. Yeah. It's the butterfly effect.
For sure.
It's all of that. And by the way, mentioning Quantum Leap and Sam Beckett, I haven't nailed it down yet, but Ben Rabb, who's one of the executives.
Oh, love that guy.
I'm going to be talking to Ben about Quantum Leap. I'm loving the new show. It's fantastic.
Yeah. They did a great job of like not ignoring Quantum Leap while they brought us back to Quantum Leap. And I love Ben. Ben's a really really good guy. He and I used to work in the same building back when he was working on Arrow, I think it was.
Oh, that's great, man. That's excellent.
And I would catch up with him. There was a little cafeteria there, and so there were a bunch of Greg Berlanti produced shows that were all in that building. We were there. Supergirl had a room. Arrow had a room. Legends had a room. Flash had a room. And I would, bump into Ben all the time at the salad bar. And it was like a college campus in a lot of ways. It's amazing how we kind of never let go of our educational system structure. It's like even when we make these new things and new endeavors, it kind of sort of falls back into like a community college or something. Like it's just kind of like the way we structure things, And so this building had a bunch of shows in it, and it was literally like being in like UCLA or something. It's like, oh, what class you in? Oh, you're in Arrow? That's cool. I got Titans.
And also his comic book work as well.
Yeah.
I mean, my God, sure. So. No, I'm looking forward to that. That's going to be great. Well, Bryan, listen, I told you an hour, and we're already at an hour and a half.
But, right on. Time flies.
I appreciate that thought because honestly, I always enjoy our talks, and please come back. If we could, maybe even either to promote when the show comes back in 2023, and then maybe even subsequently a season wrap-up look or whatever.
Yeah, for sure. We can definitely we should definitely link up before they're going to do the premiere of the second half because I'll likely have some other announcements that you would find interesting by then, and we can sort of talk about some of that stuff. So anyone who is watching this, I haven't really been looking at the comments or anything like that, but if you have a question for me and I wasn't able to get to it, find me on Twitter. It's really easy. It's just my name. It's at Bryan Edward Hill on Twitter. So just find me there and ask me there. And I'll be happy to, kind of answer you there on social media. My Instagram is at Bryan E. Hill. But I don't use it a lot. I'm not that interesting. So
I hear you, man. I'm the same way with my word balloon Instagram. And that's why believe me, I know Twitter's house is on fire. And Elon is certainly not helping. But as was the case with MySpace, I'm sure we'll eventually find another platform should the worst happen with Twitter. I'm glad you're still there. I'm still there.
I think it'll be fine ultimately.
I hope so.
But yeah, so you can find me anywhere in social media, but Twitter is probably a better place than Instagram because I still don't know what to do with it. I'm not narcissistic enough to use Instagram. I'm not saying I'm not. I'm just not enough to use Instagram.
Dude, I can't tell you how many times I'm with friends, comic creators, whatever, and I come back and it's like, why didn't I take more pictures? You know,
Sure.
You don't need to see every photograph of every meal I've ever had.
Right, you don't need to see like my shrimp and grits or whatever.
Yes, exactly.
Like,
yes.
You'll be fine.
Exactly. But what else was I going to say? And also give us and I know you haven't done any in a while, but I'm sure they're still there, and I think they're informative. Your YouTube channel.
Oh, my YouTube channel is the Bryan Hill Project. It's very easy to find, and I haven't done a video in a while, but the videos that are there are usually about writing. There's one about imposter syndrome that people seem to respond to. It's more about the psychological aspects of approaching an uncommon career. It's the pinned tweet on my Twitter feed as well. So if you go to my Twitter handle and you just look at my pinned tweet, it's a link to that video, which still gets some travel. And feel free to subscribe. I have not made a video in a bit. I will very soon. It's definitely an ambition of mine is to get back and start doing that. But yeah, so I am also there. But Twitter, as of now, is the best place to reach me because that's my cup of coffee social media thing.
I hear you, man. And seriously, I love what you said about getting with an artist and really good information and suggestions. I love that idea of looking at an existing piece and just getting permission and writing a story around that. I think that's brilliant. So
yeah. I mean, look, collaboration is the best way to move forward. And you want to combine your skills with someone else's skills towards mutual satisfaction, and usually that's going to lead a result. Lone wolves do not get very far in entertainment, so you want to coalition build as much as you can, and that will do a lot to give you a foundation there and build a reputation for yourself. And every cycle has its own generation of newcomers, and you might feel like you're a million miles away from getting a book published, but so do all of these other people that are, kind of on your strata. And then suddenly, everyone gets lifted up. And sometimes, the rising tide does lift all boats, and then you find yourself, you're part of this incoming class, right? That's how it was for me. And then all of us that were hanging out in Starbucks, looking at Damian Scott, like he could walk on water because he was doing Batgirl. And walking into Starbucks, and we were like, wow, now we're doing our own books and doing our own things, and so yeah, everything's possible, but build coalitions for sure.
That's great, man. Really sound advice from Bryan Edward Hill. I'd expect nothing less, and continued success, man. And I look forward to our next conversation.
Right on. Thank you so much, John, and thanks everyone for watching and paying attention and asking and all that. Appreciate you.
Absolutely. Tomorrow night, we're Berlin Live. As I said earlier, it's going to be memory lane for me as far as one of my old Chicago sports radio buddies, Jesse Rogers, who's killing it at ESPN. Nothing delights me more when there's a baseball controversy, and whether it's the network, radio, or TV. Let's go to Jesse Rogers and see what he thinks. And that cracks me up because I'm sure just like Brian's guys and women, it's like, I knew you when, man.
I knew you wins. Let me tell you, you don't get new. I knew you wins, right? So you gotta treasure all of them, because those kind of relationships, as you succeed and ascend, become critically important. They anchor you for sure.
We're going to have a blast. We're going to talk about Nelson George's excellent documentary that's on HBO Max right now about Willie Mays.
Nice.
We'll talk about the baseball season that just wrapped up.
Nice.
And we'll have our good memories of various sports celebrities that we encountered in our years of sports radio together.
For sure.
So that'll be all tomorrow night. So until then, thanks for watching, everybody. Stay safe, stay happy, stay healthy.